So welcome to the Inspire Show. This is actually the first ever of the show. This is a monthly program where I speak with change leaders from around the world, people who are making a difference, inspiring us to live our greatest life, to follow our passion, to overcome the hurdles that it sometimes takes to really live that. And often people say, what is a change leader? How I define a change leader is somebody who uses their expertise, their passion, their desires to better the world. More and more people, change leaders, are also needing and wanting to bring prosperity to their own life through their work. So it's marrying the desire to make a difference and also work, and bring that prosperity to their organizations and to their community. So there's that kind of combination of bringing our gifts together, helping the world, but also bringing prosperity, that they're not mutually exclusive. So that's the kind of new definition of the change leader. And the Inspire show is part of the Awakening Village, and the Awakening Village program and membership program is a free program, but it's for change leaders. So to inspire people, we also offer coaching programs twice a month, lots of different types of resources available, and a way for people to connect on a more soul level than the traditional kind of, hi, how are you, get my business card. So this is all just been beginning this month. And we really are focusing every month on what I call the 7 C's of self-mastery. So we start off with the C of connection. So with awareness, connecting to our thoughts, to our breath, to our bodies, and then outward to the other individuals that we interact with, and to the environment itself. And through that connection, we also connect to our spirit, to our source, to guidance, to creativity. There's so much to talk about with connection, and we're going to talk a little bit about that with our guest today. So I wanted to, really thank Jarrett for coming and introduce him. I'm really excited to have you on the show, the first person. And sorry, I'm just going to take a second, because I'm getting a couple of calls in from people saying they're having a hard time finding the link. So I'm just going to hold that intention that they can find it, because I've posted it everywhere I possibly can. So I'll just let that go. So welcome, Jarrett. Jarrett's someone who I met a few months ago and just was blown away. We haven't met in person, but his energy is fantastic, and I love his story. It's just so wonderful. So his official kind of story is that he was a former high-stakes business litigator and practicing law, and left that then to start his own business in law, and then left that really to decide to help attorneys and executives and other individuals who are really in high stress environments to develop the stress resiliency, higher emotional intelligence, and enhance cognitive functioning. So really to improve career fulfillment and increase happiness and overall success and peace. So we're going to talk a little bit about how he's made that journey in his life, some of the struggles that he may have overcome, to help us to understand how we can do it. Because one of the things that I see so much in the work that I do, helping people to live their passion and step into their greatest purpose and potential, is that there's thousands and millions probably of people on the sidelines wanting to do some of the things that change leaders are doing, and do the type of work that you're doing, Jarrett, meaning doing what you really love, what calls to you. So I want to just thank you for joining us, and maybe you could just introduce a little bit the work that you do before you tell us your story of how you got to doing that work. Because I described it, but gosh, I'm sure I didn't describe it very well.
No, you described it perfectly. I just got a hit to start this in an unusual way.
Okay.
Since you kind of focus on awareness,
Mm-hmm.
how about we start with all connecting to awareness? Maybe I'd lead a very brief self-awareness practice.
Love it. Love it.
Okay. So everyone who's present or listening to this recording later, just take a moment to kind of close your eyes and just notice where you're at right now at this moment. Just see what's up for you. Maybe it's excitement, and curiosity to learn something new. Maybe you're a little bit stressed. Maybe you're in the middle of a busy Wednesday. Maybe you're thinking about Valentine's Day and what you're going to be up to tonight. Maybe you have some sort of physical pain or constriction in your body. Just if you can just let the thoughts of the mind go and just kind of observe, listen. Listen to your body, listen to your heart. Almost like you're listening to a dear friend who's just wanting to share something with you. You're not trying to control what's said, you're just receiving. Maybe it's pleasant what you're hearing or seeing, maybe it's unpleasant. If it's pleasant, you may notice a desire to increase it, expand it, attach to it. If that's the case, just see if that's there. If it's an unpleasant feeling or experience, see if there's a desire to kind of make it go away, hope it away. And see if you can do neither and instead just allow whatever it is to just be there as it is. Just from this place of just watching, being the self-observer, the witness. You kind of allow your eyes to slowly open and you can direct your witnessing away from the inward while still maintaining that, and instead place it in our group. A non-traditional way to start an interview, and I recognize that, so thanks for flowing with me, Leanne.
That's great.
Everyone.
No, thank you so much. I love it. I love it. And I needed that. Thank you. So that was a great introduction. If you could now just give us a little bit about the work that you do with regard to mindfulness and awareness and stress reduction.
Absolutely. So what I do is really in 3 different firms and law schools. And those are, 3 high intensity, high pressure environments where I spent a lot of time in all 3 of those environments in my prior life. And I just saw a huge amount of suffering in all 3 of those environments. Lots of emotional pain, lack of senses of adequacy, a lot of projection, resentment, feeling unseen, not understood. And, those are the places we spend the majority of our time, right? In work and in business. And I experienced a huge amount of challenges emotionally, mentally, in those spaces. And I just became very, over time, dedicated to changing my relationship to my work, to my business, to, notions of identity within those contexts. And now I kind of go back after having made a major shift myself into those environments, and I just try to serve. That's really all I do, is I just try to offer some sort of compassion, love, light, and really through the topic that you raised, awareness, I just try to play a role, whatever role I can play in increasing awareness within an organization or an entity, or within an individual that I'm working with. So that's essentially what I do. I kind of from a more practical perspective, my little motto is less stress, more greatness. And it's based on the premise that when we're stressed, when we're in emotional and mental constriction, our brain, our decision-making, our professional functioning, our functioning in life also gets impaired. And there is this kind of antiquated notion in society that, that to be a good worker or a good employee, or we have to be, just kind of like it's a badge of honor to be in constriction, working nonstop and being stressed out and upset and not having time for self-care. And really, modern neuroscience, psychology, pretty much every aspect of science disproves that. Yet our society hasn't really caught up with the science yet. And science is now confirming, centuries and millennia old principles that are spiritually based, that are contemplative, that show that when we're in alignment, in serenity, empowered internally, our external behaviors and our external actions are completely enhanced. So really that's the goal of my work, is to help people shift their internal state so that they can also simultaneously shift their external reality.
Awesome. That's great. And you got cut off just at the very beginning when you were talking about the three areas. And I understand that it's the legal profession, the law, schools, and I think the third one is business. Is that correct?
Yeah, business. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on that. So what are your main tools or things that you bring to bear to help people with that regard?
Well, I think the main tool, at least the kind of threshold tool, is awareness, because we can't change what we can't see. So it depends on the environment. In certain environments, I can start out in a more kind of spiritual or deeper context. And in those ways, I kind of emphasize more some of these universal spiritual principles. Mm-hmm. In other kind of high intensity, really traditional business environments or law firm environments, you really can't get into too much of that. So I use kind of more modern techniques that are really tangibly supported by science, that are really in a full alignment with the other, but it really rises out of self-awareness, looking inward, trying to break down what our thoughts are, seeing what our thoughts are, what our emotions are, how they relate to each other, taking the time to separate from our work, from our conversations, from our intensity, pulling back into self, and really doing some really deep self-diagnosis of what's going on, what's causing the challenge in the relationship, what's causing the challenge in my productivity, and looking inward for those solutions, not outward. And then it's really tailored to the environment, but that's the essence of the work that I do, which is kind of let's pause and go inward. And, by doing that, we can really completely change the inward and also the outward.
Oh, that's awesome. So can you tell us just a little bit about your journey to get to where you are right now? And as you started, you told me a little bit before about that you worked as a high-stakes litigator and what the stress was like of that, and just how you ended up on your journey.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was at one of the biggest law firms in the world. I started my legal career there. I was 25 years old and working on huge cases that in an environment that's known to be the most stressful law firm in the world. And in a lot of ways, I feel like I didn't know it at the time, but I was getting like a PhD in stress. So I was learning stress. And
not the kind of PhD you really wanted.
Not exactly the PhD I wanted. But the one benefit is, unlike most PhDs where you have to pay for it, I was getting paid for my PhD.
Good stuff.
And I didn't have tools. I didn't know how to face all of these challenges. And the truth is, most of us, we go through so many years of education in our respective countries, but what do we learn? We learn, how to do math and geometry, and we learn world history and, important stuff, but we never are really taught how to deal with pain. How do we deal with anger? How do we deal with, lack of self-confidence? How do we deal with someone who's judging us? How do we deal with our own really high standards when we fall short of those standards, or when people tell us that we failed, right? And it kind of puzzled me that these things, which are the key to living life in a fulfilled way, in an impactful way, in an expansive way, our society kind of takes a general, let's just skip that. And I started to feel the effects of having 25 years. I just skipped it. And I saw that, well, I didn't know how to deal with any of these things. And I was having a lot of pain and a lot of suffering as a result of it. And it affected just my daily level of happiness. It affected how I dealt with conflict. It affected how I showed up in my marriage. I was married at the time, and I didn't know conscious ways of dealing with my own pain. So if there was behaviors that were causing me pain, I believed that my ex-wife was the cause of my pain rather than my emotional response or how I showed up in the relationship. Same thing with a really challenging boss. I worked for one of the most kind of intense lawyers in the country, and often fell into victimhood in my own head, that I felt like I was being treated unfairly, and I kind of lost my power in a lot of ways. Now I was successful and all of that, but internally I was struggling and I just didn't have the tools. And I also represented over the 12 years that I was a litigator, lots of companies. And I would go into companies and interview and work with countless employees at all levels, down to the mailroom, all the way up to senior executives, CEOs. And what I noticed was different faces. They're all experiencing different faces of the challenge, but they're all experiencing the same exact issues, the ones I listed before. And even though someone might be making $12 million as CEO of a major Fortune 100 corporation, and someone might be making $42,000 at the very bottom, what I started to experience is I started to realize that all of us are experiencing the same internal challenges. And that fascinated me. So I became dedicated to changing my own relationship to them and studying this stuff and reading countless books and going on retreats and learning to meditate and failing and falling off the meditation and trying to practice these things that I was learning and utterly failing and then judging myself for it and then trying again and working with self-judgment. And now that was the big issue. And it was just a slow and steady journey as I was working in the practice of law. It's kind of my side passion. And I just really wasn't able to fully live it for a while because I was just trying to pick this stuff up here, there, here, and there. And it was a lengthy journey of changing my own conditioning. Mm-hmm. And when it became, when there was kind of a critical mass that occurred and some major shifts occurred and friends and people and colleagues would start to come to me and say, what's your guidance on this? Or can you help me with this? Notice that you seem to be doing really well with it. I started supporting and guiding people. And that was it always filled me up. That's what enlivened me the most. That's what made me feel most alive. And over time, I realized, look, I'm doing this for free and I would do it for free for the rest of my life. But the practice of law increasingly felt vacuous and it just wasn't filling my heart. And I knew what would fill my heart. So I decided to walk away.
Wow. And that can be a really scary move, right? And a lot of people that I interact with are in a similar situation where they're in an environment, often a corporate environment, where they're kind of doing that seeking, exploration, and growing, and then are actually bringing it back, like you are, to their current environment. They're getting kind of sidelined at the coffee urn and what do you think about this? And then they're trying to figure out, this is what I'm meant to do. How do I leave and do it? Or do I have to leave or can I stay? So can you tell us a little bit about that decision making for you and how it was maybe difficult or easy for you to leave the law profession and start up on your own in this kind of fashion?
Yeah. I think the intersection between passion, talent, and pain is often where we can find our purpose. Mm. So, I always had a passion for helping others and being of service. That's always what filled me up. Even when I was lawyering and didn't have the tools to really support myself fully, I just always loved supporting friends if they were in need or family in need. Talent, I think part of the lawyering was knowing how to communicate effectively, how to inspire and energize people, how to get ideas across and into people's minds and get them, I don't like to use the word anymore, but convinced and persuaded. But there's the ability to impact who otherwise are not in a state and getting them and help shift them into another state. And then pain, I was in a lot of pain and could really experience a lot of pain and realize that other people were in a lot of pain. And I think that intersection between the passion, talent, and pain, I think all of us have talent, unique individualized talents, unique individualized passions that come from not just our skills and the abilities and things we're strong and good at, but just what energetically drives us in the heart. What fills us up, what just makes us happy effortlessly. And then we all have unique pains and bases for our suffering. And I think if even just the process of being aware of those things and starting to map over time, if anyone is listening, to just maybe write it down once a week those three categories and look at self. And what can naturally arise is from the intersection is a type of work that not only can lead to a lot more meaning and a lot more impact, but also, as you said at the beginning, prosperity and abundance.
Is that what you did? Is that, Jarrett, is that kind of how you figured it out, the path for yourself and what your purpose is, by looking at that and reflecting? Or did you get guidance, or did you have an aha moment one day where you woke up and said, I'm going to start this kind of practice and and leave the law industry, or the whatever you call it?
Great question. I wish I can say that I did it in kind of an intelligent, prudent way and laid out the three categories and saw the Venn diagram overlap, and that just wouldn't be true. And that's why I think one of the things is, like, you know, we can always offer service to others in the form of things that we've done well and also things we've not done well. Those are the two areas, right, that we can be most of service. This approach may not be the best for everyone because of their situation, but I was battling for maybe a year, being clear on the fact that I didn't want to practice law anymore. I stopped taking new cases at my law firm, and I didn't know why. I just didn't, when new clients would come in, I just was saying no for the first time in my career, and it didn't feel good in my body and my heart. So I started saying no, but I had my law firm, I had, you know, a 10-year office lease, I had, you know, a couple employees and a bunch of infrastructure, and I was
sorry to just so people make the connection, because you left the big law firm and created your own and went through that whole process of building it. So here you are with employees and a lease and everything, just to bridge that gap there. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. Exactly. So I left the big firm after 5 years and had my own firm, and now, you know, I was 5 or 6 years in, and they say it takes about 5 years to build a firm, and I finally started success that I had been looking for, and then I just suddenly realized I have no interest in doing this. And it actually started, what's interesting is, in my younger part of my career, I actually was passionate about litigating. It actually fired me up, but I didn't know at the time it was firing up my ego. And it was firing up my desire to win and defeat and demonstrate my prowess and my dominance and have results. And it was really about ambition. It was an addiction to ambition. You know, Wayne Dyer in The Shift talks about, you know, this shift that we go through from a life of ambition to a life of meaning. And it happens for different ones of us at different times in our path. But at a certain point, so we're conditioned to really just focus on ambition and accomplishing and getting and obtaining, gathering. And at a certain point of, you know, living that life, it starts to feel meaningless. And that's what happened. And I didn't know that that's what was happening. But at that point, Wayne Dyer, one of the great teachers we've had, I think, on this planet, says at that point, we just are finally yearning for the deepest form of meaning in life. We don't care about ambition anymore. And that's really what was happening. And I didn't know what it was. And it was very scary, as you said. And I think, you know, when our conditioning, when our programming starts to no longer serve us, it's an incredibly scary thing. And so I didn't know what to do, because I just wasn't enjoying the practice of law. And this is something I used to enjoy. And suddenly, not only was I not enjoying it, over time, it started to be something that I actively disliked. So I was working with a therapist. I was working with a life coach. And really I was trying to pro and con it and try to figure out, and I was trying to analyze what I could possibly do. And I had spent all this time and money creating this one skill. And I was like, if I don't practice law, how can I even pay the rent? You know, in this society, we need money, and we need to, I call it the green paper. We have this green paper, and we hand it to people, and we get things we want, and then we do work, and we get it. And how do I function without the green paper? And I was really attached to what can I do to continue to make money? And at a certain point, I just couldn't figure it out. And I made the decision. I was at a kirtan. I don't know if everyone's aware what kirtan is, but it's a form of essentially musical meditation. It's chanting and singing as a group. And this was on December 8th, 2014, when the final shift occurred. And I was in a kirtan, and a really sacred being who was leading it was leading this chanting. And It was in a really intense moment, and everyone in the room was dancing and jumping all together and singing all together, and the energy was swirling. And at the very highest climax of the energy, the entire band and the entire music stopped into complete silence. And after about 10 or 15 seconds of the most intense dynamic silence I've ever felt, the person who was leading it, Govindas is his name, a dear teacher of mine, said, "What is your soul telling you?" And what instantaneously bubbled up is, it's time to walk away from the practice of law right now. No matter what. It doesn't matter if I have no idea what I'm going to do. It doesn't matter. Right now, I'm going to walk away. So I made the decision right then and there that night that I was going to retire from the law. And then I said, well, I should sleep on it in case I totally regret it in the morning and I'm not just intoxicated with bhakti bliss. And then I woke up in the morning and I checked in and the awareness was still there. So I stepped away from the practice of law, and here's what's amazing. 5 days later, without any effort, it just hit me. Of course I'm meant to do this work of just working with people. I'm no longer in it. I need to go back and help the people who are struggling and will indefinitely struggle. There's going to be a constant flow of these people who are stuck in the very environment I was stuck in all these years, and try to offer them gifts and benefits that I can offer. And it just was kind of like an epiphany that occurred. And what's interesting is when I was doing it from the intellectual level and trying to analyze, my fear was blocking me from seeing the obvious thing. But once I made the decision and overcame the fear, then it was like, oh yeah, this is what I should do. This is what I'm meant to do. Okay, let's do that. So that's how I made the decision.
And how has it worked for you so far? That was a couple of years ago, right?
Yes, I think it's been beautiful. It's been challenging. It's been amazing. It's been full of growth. It's been full of continual trajectory growth. It's kind of like my life's work, my business, and my spiritual practice are all one and the same now. Yeah.
So if, and you maybe encounter people that are in the same place that you were a few years ago, what would you tell them?
So it's interesting because I work with a lot of, I work with groups, and I also do one-on-one coaching with people. And my solution is not that people should leave their careers and, become meditation and mindfulness teachers. That's not at all it. In fact, that's not realistic for most people, and that's not necessarily what they're searching for. That would just happen to be my path. But my thought is, in any environment that we're in, we can still have way greater fulfillment, way greater authenticity, way greater empowerment. And what happened is when I decided to leave the law at that point, what's interesting is I told all of my clients, but I said, I pitched you, and I have a lot of those clients were clients for years, 3, 4. I had cases that were ongoing for 3 or 4 years, and I didn't want to just abandon them. So I said, I can connect you with other lawyers who I really respect, or if you'd like, I can finish out the case for you. And to my dismay, every single one of them wanted me to finish the case, which I was shocked at. Especially, it's like if a surgeon said to you, I'm happy to do the surgery, but I'm really not at all interested in doing surgery at this point. You got to find another surgeon. But they wanted to keep me, and I knew over time I learned, I didn't know at that point, I had resistance to that at the moment. I was like, what? I want to be out of this. I want to do meaningful work. Why am I now? This could take another year of doing legal work for people. What I learned over time is I got to really, in a 1-year experiment, live all of these principles and teachings and really, in a directed, purposeful way, apply them to every day of my work, knowing I was leaving the law. And now I'm just doing it as an experiment to see what these techniques really are like when they're applied to people, so that I can really, in a kind of microscopic way, in every kind of nook and cranny of my work, apply these things and see how it goes. And that's what ended up happening. So I had a lot more fulfillment, a lot more joy, a lot more self-care, a lot more ease, a lot less stress. And I was just as successful, if not more. I was getting, just as good results from my clients, delivering, relationships improved. things became much more effortless and much more successful, and I was applying these techniques. So that's often what I help people with now. A lot of people, they have a mortgage and they have 3 kids. It's just not realistic to just, throw off the business shoes and put on sandals and walk along the beach. That's just not realistic. So what I try to help people do is, within the environment in which they're in, help them find greater freedom, greater peace, greater joy, greater meaning. Mm-hmm. And then if for them, they're called to shift and move out, that's beautiful, and I support them in that. But that's not necessarily the right decision for a lot of people these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And the timing, but I love the way that you did it too. You made the decision, you slept on it, you continued to say yes as a decision, but you took a year to do it and to observe. It's almost like your pilot year. And that's for people who are thinking about shifting. I actually just back up that you also were practicing the things that were learning, which is being present and really, not just reacting and jumping, but, really using those skills and then learning from them and learning how you could apply them. I think that's a really great trajectory for some people is, first start to see what's calling them. And then before jumping, spend some time in it. And I often talk to people about having kind of like a sideline business to start, a secondary garden to start out and to see it and try it out rather than just jumping, because then it can be very stressful if you have financial commitments with almost everyone has to some extent that they have to do. So. That's really, really interesting. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just, we've got about 20 minutes left. I'm going to open it up to the floor to people who might want to ask you a question. I have lots more questions. So I'm going to just get people to think a little bit about their question, give them a minute, and I'm going to just ask you one more quick one. And then if anyone wants to, they can put up their I'm not sure about this. You can, I'll put the different screen and they can see. I think there's a hand up thing. I think you can put up your hand. Let me just see. I think actually if you go under, there's a place on your screen, but I'm not sure exactly how to do that. So, so if you were like, to just say, what would be kind of your common misconceptions or myths around awareness in the legal profession or business, things that you kind of have to help people overcome when you're working with them? What would be maybe 1 or 2 kind of key myths or misconceptions about consciousness and business and the law? That
their intention.
Can you say that? Well,
I think that's the biggest one, that people either actively or subconsciously believe that if they engage in contemplative practices in connection with business, that it's undermining their business potential, that makes them more frivolous as employees or as executives, or it means that they're pushing away work and they're not as committed to their craft. I think that's the biggest misconception I see.
So how do you respond to that?
I respond to it by saying it's one of the myths of the mind. There's a story I like to tell of Gandhi on this. Gandhi was, one of the busiest, actually one of the most productive people in the history of the planet, right? At the same time, he was trying to remove a colonial power from his homeland. He was establishing India's first civil rights system. He was trying to eliminate centuries-old bloodshed between Muslims and Hindus. That was a typical day for him, right? So he was a busy fellow. And he would meditate every single day for an hour. But at one point, things got even more intense. There were more world leaders in town. There were more events, more discussions to be had, more progress. Things were really heating up. And one of the reporters asked him, Mahatma, things are so busy. We know you meditate an hour a day, but now that things are this busy, do you have time to meditate an hour a day? And he said, nope, now that things are this busy and I have to accomplish this much, instead of meditating for 1 hour a day, I shall meditate for 2. And it was kind of like a paradigm shift. And his point was that the human mind, as we get busier and busier and feel like we need to accomplish more and more in the external world, we subconsciously assume we need to pull away from ourselves more. And that is a dangerous and wrong assumption. he and countless spiritual teachers from all of the world's traditions have all agreed that really in those times when we need to accomplish even more, that's the time that we need to even go deeper inward. And that's when we can connect to resiliency and strength and proper judgment and releasing from fear. And then we can actually function way more effectively in the business world. So that's a big myth that I used to carry it. I would go, weeks and months without doing any self-care practices. So I was a total believer in that myth. And so many people still are. So that's one of the big ones, is I try to help them shift that. And what people end up seeing is when they spend a few minutes, they don't have to spend 2 hours meditating like Mahatma. We do have things to do around here. But just spending a few minutes, actually, 5 minutes here, 2 minutes there, 1 minute there, even 7 to 10 minutes spread over the course of the day. I don't care how busy you are. I don't care if you're the busiest human being in the world. It's a lie of the mind to believe that I don't have 10 minutes throughout a 24-hour day to actually focus on my own well-being, my own wealth, internal wealth, so that I can be more productive. And by the way, the exact same reason why, I like to ask people, who feel stuck and say, I don't have time to kind of care for myself or engage in any of these internal contemplative practices. I ask them, how often do you sleep? Like, how many days a week do you sleep? I say, every day, obviously. I said, every day. Okay. Well, how many hours a night do you sleep? And they say, 5, 6 hours. Some of them say 7 or 8. I say, wait a minute. So 6 hours a night, you literally just like lay in a reclined horizontal position with your eyes closed and you're not working? You don't sound very committed to your work. I'm confused. I thought you were like an executive who actually had a successful career. You sound very relaxed. So why don't you just drop that from 6 hours to 2 hours a night? That'll give you 4 more hours to get productive stuff done. Why don't you do that? And they kind of say, obviously, if I only slept 2 hours a day, I would obviously turn into a mess. And I said, well, what effect would that have on your productivity in your career? They say, of course it would plummet. Well, it's the same reasoning that we apply to sleep. We just need to apply to our waking hours, which is, it's what Steve Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People called the difference between productivity or production and production capacity. And if we devote all of our waking hours to production and producing, rather than carving out some time for production capacity, where we literally nourish our ability to produce more, then we will undoubtedly get burnt out and be way less successful in business. So it's helping people understand that it doesn't make you lazy. It makes you fiscally and business-wise prudent to carve out a little bit of time for your own production capacity.
I love that. That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, I can see you're passionate about that, and it's a myth that's carried by so many people, and it's awesome. The way you described it was really awesome. So I'm going to, one person just asked about, how to contact you after. We're going to get to that later on. But I wanted to know if anyone has any questions specifically for Jarrett about anything he's been talking about, the way that he works, the way he works in these high stress environments. We started the conversation before some people were on about the fact that he's in Santa Monica, and it's this very interesting vortex of calm and collaboration and connection. And so any questions you might have, please put up your hand or put something in the chat. And as I said, I have lots of other questions to ask you, but I wanted to give it out to people that might want to ask. And I know one of my friends is on who always asks questions. Julie.
No pressure, Julie.
Yeah, exactly. She's feeling it now.
I'll wait a bit for the question, but just so people know, the hands up thing is under the more option.
Under the more option?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that. Okay.
The 3 dots on the right.
Okay. I don't have that on my screen. Okay. Thank you, Julie. Do you have a question or no?
Yes, I do.
I knew you would. She's a reporter, so she always has a question.
You've been talking mostly in theory with a lot of really concrete examples as it pertains to your own life. But can you give us 1 or 2 examples of how you approach a new client in order to assess where to start with that person? Because I think that would give us a better idea of what your approach is.
Mm.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, I think it really depends on if it's in the individual coaching context or a room full of corporate employees. And I know it sounds like I'm being a little evasive, Julie, but I don't actually have a tangible approach. I bring a different approach to the environment based on what I've kind of learned in preparation for it. But it really depends on what the topic is, what the issue is. But one, I can give you an example of something that tends to come up with almost all of us, right? That's kind of more tangible, is the relationship between our thoughts and our emotions, right? No matter if it's in an individual coaching environment or a group or a law firm, we all have difficult emotions, right? Frustration, anger, irritation, fear. And one of the things I like to do in that context is just an example of something more tangible is I like to break down like what I call the arithmetic of emotions, which is neutral event plus underlying belief equals emotion. So what happens is a lot of times we'll be experiencing an emotion in a moment and we'll be overwhelmed by that emotion. Something bad or challenging will happen at work. You know, someone may snap at us or a boss may give us unfair feedback and we may get really reactive and upset and we feel like, you know, we're feeling down and we're angry and we're rattled and they didn't understand what we were doing. And all of a sudden we're consumed with emotion and we get stuck in that emotion. And the question becomes, how do we shift out of that emotion? And essentially, we can't, right? We can't just get our emotion out of us by wanting the emotion to go away, by willing the emotion away. Most of us are just like, I wish I wasn't so upset. I wish I could move on. I wish I could forgive this person, right? And we usually can't just push the emotion away, nor can we change the behavior that led to the emotion, what I call the neutral event, the original event that occurred. The person acted the way they acted. The event has already occurred. It's been concretized into reality. It's already done. The question is, you know, we can't change that from happening. So we often, as we think back to that, it triggers the emotion again, and we just get stuck in this whirlwind of emotion event. But there's a bridge there, and the bridge is the underlying belief that's almost always unconscious. And we often have an unconscious belief that is actually what triggers the emotion. So from the event, there's an underlying belief, a schema we have, and pre-existing belief, and that triggers the emotion. So when we get, like a simple example, when we get cut off while we're driving a car, or driving and then someone, you know, on the freeway cuts us off and it kind of sprays off into the exit just in time. A lot of times, I used to experience anger in that situation. I used to get triggered and be like really angry and upset, right? Little road rage in LA style. I realized, wait a minute, why am I getting angry? Well, let me follow what's going on. And what I realized is I have an underlying belief that anyone who does a last second cutoff is a selfish jerk. That's a schema, kind of a pre-existing mental thought that's locked into our cognition and is there without any purposeful thought. So what happens is when an event occurs that triggers the schema, the emotion of anger and resentment flows instantaneously. But I'm responsible for that schema. So I decided, let me pick a different schema, a different underlying belief. For the next drive, every time someone cuts me off, I'm going to believe that the person is a loving soul who's rushing to the hospital to help their loved one. That's why they're cutting me off, right? And I started doing that just as a practice. And what I noticed is people would cut me off and I would just feel compassion and love for them. And here's what's interesting. So that's what the emotion was that followed. And here's what's interesting. Do I know that they were doing that? No. But did I know that they were being selfish jerks before? No. We're actually being delusional in all situations. So my thought is, if we're going to be delusional, let's at least be positively delusional. And what ends up happening in our relationships and work is way more often the case is that the person is coming from a place of suffering or struggle that's causing them to act this way. And it's not because they're a devious, evil being. But you know what our mind does unconsciously is it judges them as being devious, evil. And then we're stuck with anger and resentment, and then we're suffering. So so one of the approaches I like to do is I like to do a flow sheet with people where they identify key stressors or key patterns where they're feeling certain types of emotions or difficult emotions in their life. And I try to get them to see the pattern between the triggering event, the neutral event, and the emotion they're feeling, and then try to increase their awareness on the underlying belief or schema that they possess, that they probably received from their parents, from their kindergarten teachers, their coaches growing up. It's what Don Miguel Ruiz calls the domestication process. We get a bunch of these ideas stuck in our unconscious, interjected in our unconscious when we're super young, and then they govern our emotions for the rest of our lives. Most of us don't see it, but when we raise it to the surface and we start identifying it in paper, in writing, on paper, and we start to go through and we really start to see what emotions tend to come out and what events tend to trigger it. And once we identify the unconscious belief and we start to shift it, actively practice it, and it's awkward and uncomfortable, it feels unnatural, what ends up happening is we can start to change that emotional reaction pattern and have a completely different reaction. And by the way, that's what Viktor Frankl, he was an amazing Holocaust survivor, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he described that in the Holocaust is when he actually developed his highest sense of freedom, self-love, and love for others, even for his captors. And his explanation was essentially this, that through that whole process, he learned that between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And in that gap is my personal freedom and my power. So many of the people who were in the concentration camps with him, he said, they would have the terrible behavior occur, and then their emotional reaction of hate, disgust, fear would naturally flow. And that's totally understandable. No judgment for that, of course. He said he realized that in that gap, he had his freedom, and he found this, in that space the ability to change his beliefs around the Nazis, around his situation. And he actually, even though he had no external control, he actually gained more internal control than he ever had in his life. And he became a much more evolved and actually happier man, he says. So essentially, if Viktor Frankl can do that in the Holocaust, I think we can do it at our jobs.
That's really great. Love it. Thank you very much. I'm just going to read, there's a couple more questions here.
Sorry about my lighting issues.
No, it's very good. It looks very sunny.
It could either be like so bright that it's blinding and I can't even see, or if I put the shades down, then it's kind of dark and mysterious.
And I'm sure it's beautiful, sunny, and warm there, unlike it is here, right? So we kind of asked this, but if there was anything, this is kind of on a practical business perspective, because a lot of people that listen to this now, are listening now or later, their big concern is, how do I move into my passion, I'm doing what I really love, I'm of service to the world, but how do I start to attract clients? So, and especially as Heather was asking here about, how did you start to get corporate clients? Is it because you had them as clients before and you had the contacts, or did you just start from scratch and use law of attraction to?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. And look, I think we all have contacts. It's really about how we engage with the contacts, and then how we respond internally when things are challenging or the contacts are not going forward as we were hoping they would. But my principle for building clients was this: persistent, passionate, selfless service. So I thought that because in the beginning I was struggling. I was, wanting to give away my services for free just to get in the room, and people weren't hiring me. And I was kind of outraged and upset and judging them. And I realized, oh, great. So I'm wanting to be this person who brings light and love to environments. And how am I doing that? By judging others.
Oh, I've never done that, Jarrett.
I'm sure you never have, yes. So what I decided was, look, I can't control how long it's going to take to build clients who actually pay me. But what I can control is I can control how much passion I show up with. My service is selfless. It's not just for me and making money. And by the way, I'm all about the alignment between abundance and service. So I disagree with this kind of antiquated spiritual notion that you have to be in scarcity in order to be a true servant. I completely disagree with it. That being said, if our primary motivator is financial abundance, I believe it almost always in this space, people fail. and that's based on lots of readings from so many of the great teachers, that if on the other hand you turn it over the financial aspect and instead just focus on the service of it, the impact, the love, and the problem is we can do that for weeks, months at times, but when we don't get the immediate, even after months, right? 5 months, 6 months can feel like a gut-wrenching amount of time when you're offering services, right? Years, sometimes people try for years and they're unable to break through. And the question is, so for me, I said to myself, I am just going to I'm not going to let the rejections, the no's, the obstacles make me less passionate or less persistent or less open-hearted. I'm going to just keep like a fierce heart warrior. I'm just going to keep offering service in order to give love and impact people. And if 90%, 99% of the people just keep saying, not interested, no, not interested, go away, out of here. I noticed my tendency was then to constrict or not offer my heart as openly or not go in with as much passion, or maybe the next day sit and judge myself and not come back really strong. So I decided, look, if I offer passionate and persistent, very consistently, selfless service that's focused on helping and serving others, and I just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, I will break down the resistance over time. And by the way, learn from the mistakes. Okay, if there's resistance, if I'm kind of what they call the failure way to success theory, right? We don't know. We often don't know which way our financial abundance is. So being not just kind of dogmatically offering the service, like, I don't care what you're needing or wanting, I'm just going to give you what I know you want. But responding, right, when it's, okay, wait a minute, these doors keep closing, but this, I'm kind of feel like I'm being pushed this way, and shifting and being adaptable and angling. And I think that if we have a true passion for service, I mean, this is my belief, if we have a true passion for service and we're doing this work from a place of really wanting to impact people positively, and it's not coming from ego, and it's not coming just from wanting to build a business, and it's really primarily you're being driven by excitement, following your excitement, your passion for serving others, and you consistently do it while properly adapting over time and listening to the messages of the universe, I think it's an inevitability that in the right divine timing for each of us, that we start to break through with success.
Very well said. Really well said. That I think, you know, if you have one more comment to make on this, very short, Joanne asked it, but it relates to what you were just saying about shifting and sitting back and seeing. She asked about people, like potential clients who may be not doing the things that they say they want to change, but they're not doing the things that they need to do to change. She calls it lazy. But I think people don't change for a lot of reasons. Some of them, you know, fear or whatever, doubt. But so you must have clients where you're giving up the selfless service for pay or not, and they're not kind of picking up the slack on their end and doing the things that are required. How do you deal with that?
You know, it's a great question. And I think first and foremost, I try to connect to non-judgment, because right there, right, when people are not making the shifts, not making the changes, right, we may notice a tendency, if we're serving, if we're trying to guide them, to start judging them for not changing quickly enough, for not transforming. And then we fall into that same trap. And that's why this work, if we're doing this type of work from any angle, it's completely aligned with our own individual practice, right? Because you can't do this work without constantly seeing your own stuff bubble up.
I love that.
But for me, I think that really change is a hard thing for a lot of people. And it takes a lot of time, and there's, you know, stages of change. And usually, right, we start by being unconscious and undesiring of change. Then we can become conscious and desiring of change, but unable to actually make the change. And then if we keep showing up over and over with an attempt, a conscious desire to make change, and an inability to make change, over time, I believe that's when change occurs. I think that most people have to be stuck in the conscious awareness that they want to make change, but an inability to actually make the change for a good amount of time. Some people can just spontaneously change, but in my experience, the vast majority of people have to be stuck in the incubator of having a sincere desire for change, a clear awareness that they need to make change, but just an inability to execute. And then in that process, in that incubation process, that's where the more subtle, nuanced awarenesses come in that actually are critical over time to make the change. That's where we face, the self-judgment over not being able to change, and we shift our relationship to that. And then the change often occurs. So in my experience, there's often kind of a blockage, a stuck period that people have to work through that it's just part of their process of change, and we're not serving them if we get irritated, which is not to say if we're doing free work for someone, keep offering them guidance. And we all have also the friends who just keep repeating the same mistakes, and they keep doing the same things over and over, and then they keep reaching out and wanting help, and they're blaming the situation. They're not taking accountability, and they're not changing. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a very different thing, because we have to obviously be able to exert our boundaries and lovingly allow people not to use us as enabling strategies for their own non-growth. That being said, if someone does really appear like they're genuinely wanting to change and grow and expand, but they just are struggling with the ability to execute, I think that's a really human thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, really, really well said. Thank you. That's awesome. I really appreciate that, Jarrett. There was just one other comment that I just want to make. Gwen said just about the idea of these are so important, the discussion we're having, the advice that you're sharing with us, the wisdom you're sharing with us. And her point is it's just so hard to do it every day. It makes such a change, a positive impact. She works with the public actually every day, and her perspective is just so hard to do. I don't know if there's any last thoughts you had about that. The difficulty of that.
Difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think the everyday is not realistic. We have off days. Mm-hmm. We feel pummeled at times. We feel disempowered, ineffective. And so I think it's that balance between doing our very best and, kind of pushing our comfort zone, and also being really gentle with ourselves when we just can't show up. Mm. And, sometimes we go through these challenging times in our own life and it affects our work. I went through like a couple weeks earlier this year, recently, where I was just not as effective, not fired up. I was feeling kind of energetically not as grounded, and it just impacted my ability to go out and have that same energy and impact. And I think really when we fall into those moments, just a lot of self-forgiveness and self-gentleness. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a big one. I agree. I really appreciate that comment, that it's just not realistic to do it every day. It can be an intention and to do it as often as we can. But really, I think the self-judgment, when we start to fall short and start to struggle, is much more likely to prevent us from ultimately succeeding than anything else. Because we get stuck in a downward spiral and then start to fall into a self-judgment cycle. So I think just that's part of it too, is this beautiful balance between extension and gentle acceptance of where we currently are. And then growing and expanding and accepting that, hey, at this point, I'm where I am, and just finding a lot of love and gentleness for the challenges I'm facing.
Awesome. That's such a great way to answer that question. Thank you. Yeah. So before we finish off, maybe you could tell people where they could get more information about the work that you do, any projects you might be working on, or anything that they could connect with you more deeply or further, rather.
Sure. Well, I think you can just check out, I think there's contact information on my website, which is www.jarrett, Jarrett-Green, spelled like the color, .com. And so I come into companies and groups that want to change their group dynamics and their energies. And I offer, one day, workshops or half day workshops, or, lunchtime presentations, or sometimes programs over time, like 6-week programs where I come in once a week. And I also do individual coaching and work with people individually. So if any of that stuff calls to you, or maybe to someone you work with, that's available. And let's see, my beloved Rebecca, who's actually on this call, Rebecca Simon, the executive director of the Mindfulness and Law Society. She's also a lawyer who's really deep into this same work. And we decided very recently that I've been to India, I think a month, 2 months each of the last 5 years. And it's a real major part of my my practice. And then I come back and I just usually am on fire in the work that I do here. And we decided very recently we're going to lead a journey. And Leanne, you've been an amazing encourager of that. And we're going to lead a journey later this year in either October or November of a retreat to India, really the birthplace of all of these contemplative practices, so much deep, deep wisdom. Rishikesh, which is actually the birthplace of meditation and yoga, to me, the most amazing city on planet Earth. And if you guys are at all interested, reach out. We'll be posting stuff a couple months from now probably, but if you've ever thought about maybe going to India, love to guide you and support you. We're going to go into a lot of kind of deep and loving self-work and connecting to all types of amazing teachers and yogis. And it's a city I hold really dearly to my heart, and we'd love to have you join us.
That sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to check it out. And you can post it in our Awakening Village as well in the Facebook group. And so people can get that information. When I post this, I'll have all your links. It's also, they're on my website. And so I really wanted to thank you so much. I really appreciate all the wisdom that you brought to our community, and hope that people will make those connections with you if, maybe on Facebook. I don't know if you can accept connections on Facebook or messages. That's sometimes easy for people to connect there as well, to learn a little bit more about you.
I do. I'm less active on Facebook, so email is just better for me, but just reach out. Also, if you just have some thoughts, I know that some of you had some deeper questions and more unique things that are more tangible. I'd love to talk to you about your unique circumstances that you're talking about, and maybe I can give you a little bit more tangible thoughts, because it was a little bit esoteric today. So happy to give more tangible stuff. Just reach out. I'd love to hear.
Thank you. And a lot of people are thanking you through the comments here as we're going along. And so I wanted to, give my deepest thanks to you and to the people that were on and the questions. And just to let people know that next month on March 21st, I'm going to be interviewing another change leader, a local one. Her name is Rhonda Massad, and many of you know her locally. She left her job to become a Montreal blogger of amazing proportions. And so we'll talk a little bit about her story and how she's doing service to our community. Also reminding people that this Inspire Show is part of the Awakening Village free membership. So I'd really love it if you join in and join the group. It's really a community of receiving and giving of service. It's that concept of, by being in this village, we can all help each other to better the world. And just a couple of things coming up for me is on March 24th, I'm doing a full day workshop about living an inspired life. So if you want to get onto doing more work that you love and really figure out what that passion and purpose is, you're welcome to check that out. And then I have a new session of the Thrive Zone coming up in April, and that's my longer program where we really go in deep. And some of the people that are on here are my clients that are on that program. So I thank you guys very much for your attention, for joining in. And just next week we have a coaching session on the Wednesday. So everyone's welcome, both Rebecca and you, Jarrett, as well, where we talk about our goals and what we want to achieve over the next coming months and year, and how we can help each other to achieve that. It's almost kind of like a large mastermind, and it's all free, and it's all in service of our community, of all of us trying to live our light. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Jarrett, very much for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Leanne, and thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.